My sister-in-law wanted me to pay for her entire bachelorette trip despite treating me like a nerd, but I refused. Now the wedding is canceled, her fiancé has left her, and she's completely lost it. So, my sister-in-law, Steffi, 26, and I have quite a history together because we went to high school together, and she was a massive bully. Coincidentally, I was one of her favorite targets. Why not? I was a total nerd in high school, and my appearance certainly didn't help my case. I was very skinny and had braces, which were practically my worst nightmare. I was literally the stereotypical nerdy girl from a teen movie, where things only improve once the glasses come off, except in my case, it was braces, not glasses. Unfortunately, my transformation didn't happen until I was in college. Thankfully, I look much better now because I gained some weight and had my braces removed before starting college. Not that there was anything wrong with how I looked before, but now I'm just less likely to be bullied by people, that's all. Anyway, I met my husband, Andy, at a college party a few years ago when I was in my 3rd year. He was 3 years older than me and was DJing at the party. It used to be his part-time job back then. I guess it was meant to be because I got really drunk at that party, and he offered to drive me home since my apartment was far away, and no one else was willing to help me out because I was absolutely wasted. He was kind enough to take me home, even scribbling his phone number on the back of my hand, telling me to call him because he liked me. The next day, I woke up with a terrible hangover, but I knew I'd found someone special. I called him and asked him out, and that was it. We really hit it off on the first date, and I knew I'd found the one. But the only issue was his sister because he told me about his family on the first date, and we made an instant connection while talking about our families. He mentioned having a sister named Steffi. So, when I joked about how I had a bully in high school with the same name, he gave me a very serious look and said it might actually have been his sister because she had some behavioral issues back in school. Then he told me the name of the high school she attended, and we realized his sister was, in fact, my high school bully. It was a bit awkward, but I wasn't going to let that ruin what we had. So I told him it wasn't a big deal because I liked him, not his sister. So she had nothing to do with any of this, and he agreed. After dating for 3 months, we decided to introduce each other to our families. While introducing him to my family was relatively easy, it was a bit hard and awkward for him because he knew his sister and I didn't have the best relationship. The first time I had dinner with his family, I was very nervous, especially because of Steffi, but it actually wasn't that bad. His parents were very warm and kind to me, and Steffi was a bit cold and distant, but that was still better than the way she used to treat me in high school. I actually preferred this new version of her because she was much less problematic to deal with. So, she didn't talk to me much and kept our interaction to a minimum, but I considered that a win because it meant I didn't have to talk to her, and we could just ignore each other and leave it at that. I'm pretty lucky because that's how things have been between us for the past 2 years, and I haven't had to interact much with her, nor has she shown any interest in being friends with me. Even when Andy and I got married 2 years ago, she only talked to me as much as was necessary, and that was it. I'd say she and I aren't close at all, and we both prefer it that way because after how she treated me in high school, I don't think I'd want to be friends with someone like her anyway. Not that Andy has a problem with it, because he's very aware of how awful his sister can be, so he doesn't mind the fact that the two of us don't talk. He knows I haven't forgiven her for the way she ruined my life in high school because she's never shown any remorse, and I can't forgive someone who isn't even sorry. He understands and respects that. But he and Steffi have a normal sibling relationship, like most people. And I don't mind because I know he doesn't see Steffi the same way I see her, and I'm completely fine with that. It's also been a long time since high school ended, and I don't want to tell my husband not to talk to his sister and create unnecessary drama because she and I are civil now, and that's all that matters. So everything is fine in the family, and I've gotten used to it. Honestly, I got a huge shock a few weeks ago when Steffi reached out to me and asked if I'd be willing to join her on her Bachelorette trip to the Greek islands. She didn't casually ask me over the phone, she actually invited me out to lunch. Although I was skeptical at first, Andy was the one who told me to give her a chance, so I went to lunch with her, and that's where she asked me. She was really nice to me during that lunch, and even, for the first time, apologized and addressed our history instead of pretending it didn't exist. It was quite shocking because I never expected Steffi to admit to bullying me relentlessly when we were in high school. When it finally happened, I had absolutely no idea how to react. She said she was sorry for the way she treated me back then and admitted she was just being a total brat. She realized her mistake too late. She also mentioned that the reason she never addressed it, even after I started dating her brother, was because she felt uncomfortable bringing up things from the past and didn't know how to face me after everything she'd put me through as a teenager. As she talked about all this, she even added some tears to make it seem really genuine. And I, being the naive nerd, believed every word of it. I told her I forgave her, and that it was all in the past anyway because I had no issues with her now, since we were all adults and could deal with things the way we were supposed to, by simply having some drinks together and forgetting it. She seemed happy about that, and we ended the lunch on good terms. She asked me to join her and her friends on her bachelorette trip to the islands because she wanted to make up for lost time and really make me feel like I was her friend. Initially, I was a bit hesitant to accept, but she really convinced me, and eventually, I agreed because I thought it would be a fun experience and might actually help build a relationship with Steffi. I was tired of the tension whenever we were in the same room. So, after much deliberation, I decided to say yes because I was willing to let go of the past and give our relationship a fresh start, and there was no better way to do that than by going on a trip and just relaxing. That was a few weeks ago, and since then, Steffi and I stayed in touch. She was set to get married next month, and we were supposed to go on the trip earlier this week, but it didn't happen because of a little stunt she decided to pull at the airport. She thought she could trick me into paying for the entire trip by announcing it at the airport so I couldn't back out. But what she didn't know was that I had absolutely no problem ditching them and going home because, unlike her, I didn't care what her friends thought of me, or even what she thought of me, to be honest. We arrived at the airport about an hour before our flight was scheduled to depart, and everyone was chatting. But then Steffi said she wanted to grab a coffee and asked me to join her, so I did. While we were at the counter, she casually said, "Oh, by the way, I hope all your cards work internationally because otherwise you'll have a hard time paying for things." I told her I had brought cash for souvenirs and knick-knacks I wanted to buy. She then clarified that she meant for the hotel rooms, the food we were going to eat, and even the plane tickets, because I would need to reimburse her for everything. I had no idea what she was talking about since we had never discussed this before, and 30 minutes before our flight was supposed to take off wasn't exactly the right time to have this discussion. She was telling me all this in a very casual manner, so I asked her if she was expecting me to pay for myself throughout the trip, and then she said, "Not just for yourself, but for everyone on the trip, all my friends and me. I thought you'd cover everything and sponsor it. That's why I picked such an expensive destination since I know you can afford it. Is that going to be a problem?" she asked. I still remember her exact words and even the tone she used because she said it as though it was the most obvious thing in the world, despite the fact that we had never discussed this, and I had never agreed to any of it. I asked her if she was serious, and she said she obviously expected me to cover everything. Otherwise, she would be forced to think of me as stingy because I was the highest earner she knew and couldn't think of a single reason why I'd say no to sponsoring the trip. Well, I could think of more than a couple of reasons. The first being that I had never agreed to any of this and she hadn't even asked me if I'd be okay with it. So I couldn't understand why she'd assume such a thing. And while it was true that I earned more than most people she knew, since I'm the vice president of a medium-sized firm, I still didn't feel that obligated me to sponsor her trip, especially when we were still building a relationship. We weren't at that point yet, and I definitely wasn't going to consider funding a vacation for a group of women I didn't even know. Most importantly, this was my money, and it was my choice. So she could think of me as stingy all she wanted, but I didn't care because I wasn't going to spend an exorbitant amount of money on a trip I hadn't even planned for a group of people I didn't like or know. After standing there for a while as she sipped her coffee, I decided to head back to where everyone was sitting, grab my stuff, and just leave because this was ridiculous. I didn't want to create a scene in a public place, so I decided to leave quietly. Steffi ran after me with her coffee, and even her friends tried asking what was going on, but I didn't think it was worth explaining. I just walked out of the airport and got into the first cab I could find before they could reach me. As soon as I was in the cab, I decided to block Steffi so she couldn't contact me or bother me. The next thing I did was call Andy to tell him what had happened. I really felt bad for him, because he'd been so excited about the fact that his sister and I were finally getting along and had thought this trip would improve our relationship. But clearly, we were both very wrong about that. When I called him and told him what Steffi had tried to do, he was even more outraged than I was. He said her behavior was unacceptable and that he was going to call his parents immediately and tell them about it. I suppose he was much more disappointed in his sister's behavior than I was because I already knew she was a terrible person, and this turn of events didn't surprise me much. But I think Andy and his parents may have expected a little more from her, and she had really let them down. I think that's what really ruined things for her after that call, because once they found out what she had tried to do, everyone was incredibly upset. Andy didn't speak to her directly, but I could tell he wasn't going to let this go because it was pretty insulting to me, and he was really disappointed in his sister. Once I got home from the airport, he told me I didn't need to talk to Steffi anymore, but I didn't need to be told twice, since I didn't want to have anything to do with her anyway. I didn't hear from anyone in his family for the rest of the day, not even his parents, but I knew he was on the phone with them throughout the day. Things were pretty heated that day, so I decided not to talk to anyone about it because I knew everyone was already upset, and I didn't want to add to the drama. So I stayed quiet and waited for the storm to pass. 2 days went by without anything happening, but I did talk to my in-laws during that time, and they told me how sorry they were for the way Steffi had treated me. I told them it wasn't a big deal because it wasn't exactly their fault. I had seen the way they had raised their son, so I knew parenting wasn't the issue, and if there was anyone to blame for how Steffi turned out, it was just herself. Andy and I also went back to normal pretty quickly after that. I didn't ask him about any of the consequences Steffi would face for her actions because I just wasn't interested in any of it. All I knew was that I no longer had to interact with her, and that was enough for me. But then, 2 days after the incident, I found out the wedding had been canceled and her fiancé had left her, a consequence indirectly caused by what she did to me. When Andy and I got home from work that day, he told me Steffi was blaming our family for ruining her relationship with her fiancé. And I was really confused about how that was even logical since we hadn't spoken to her after the airport incident. However, apparently this had really happened because after the incident, once Andy told his parents what Steffi had tried to do at the airport, they called her and told her to apologize to me. But she didn't think she had done anything wrong and instead started telling her parents I was rude and stingy and that she was glad I had left. So her parents got really upset and told her they were no longer going to pay for the wedding and that she could find someone else to fund her extravagant event. She tried to pretend she didn't care, but it was a huge deal for her to cover all the wedding expenses on her own, since she had just quit her job and started her own business a couple of months ago, and it hadn't even broken even yet. So paying for everything herself was out of the question. Even knowing that, she tried to act like she didn't care because she still didn't want to apologize to me, or even admit she had made a mistake. The wedding day was just a few weeks away, as it was literally next month, so this was a bit of an emergency for her at that point. And from what Andy told me after that conversation with his parents, she decided to talk to her fiancé and let him know her parents would no longer cover the wedding expenses, so she expected him to take over. I think that's what caused a huge fight between the two, because it was obviously unfair of her to just spring this on him with only a few weeks to go before the wedding. So they fought, and that's how the wedding ended up canceled. After Andy told me the full story, I asked how he knew all of this, and he said that after the fight with her fiancé, Steffi showed up at their parents' house and also fought with them, blaming them and me for what had happened. Mostly she blamed me, which I think is really unfair because I didn't even have anything to do with this situation. She said it was my fault she had to cancel her trip with her friends because I refused to pay, and now she had to cancel her entire wedding. And her fiancé was probably going to break up with her because there was no way out of this. I absolutely disagree about the trip because there was absolutely no discussion about me paying for anything. So it was ridiculous of her to expect anything from me. Besides, I don't know why this would be my fault since the trip was already paid for, and she only asked me to reimburse it, which I wasn't going to do. Does anyone think I was in the wrong for all of this? Update 1. Hi. First of all, thank you so much for letting me know that I'm not really the one to blame here. I think I really needed to hear that. I had been feeling really awful about everything, and it didn't help that Steffi had been posting sad things about feeling betrayed. It's been 5 days since the airport incident, and although I have her blocked everywhere, I know for a fact she's been posting strange, sad quotes seeking attention. And when someone asks her about it, she tells them her version of the story, pretending to be the victim. So, whatever guilt I had about her wedding being canceled is now gone because clearly she won't stop at anything to make me look like the villain in her story, and I don't need to feel bad for her. She's even gone so far as to tell people that although she expected me to stab her in the back, she didn't think her brother would encourage or tolerate something like this. But she was obviously wrong, and her brother doesn't care at all about how she feels. Once again, I feel like I need to emphasize that she literally never asked me if I was comfortable or willing to pay for the trip expenses for her and all her friends. So the fact that she had to cancel it at the last minute and return from the airport was her fault. But somehow, in her version of events, we had apparently had this discussion several times, but I lost it at the airport and decided to make a scene and walk away, which was a huge blow to her because then she and all her friends had to go back home, and the trip didn't even happen, and it was really humiliating. I don't know. I guess the trip was never actually paid for, and she was expecting me to pay for everything at the moment, which would have been far more expensive. So if that's what really happened, well, yeah, that was my fault. But I'm far from feeling bad for her. It's frustrating how she's been spreading these lies about me, but honestly, I'm happy that most of the relatives she's been telling have contacted me to ask about it, because it seemed very out of character for me. And I've been able to clear things up and tell them my side, and for the most part, people have believed me. So whatever she's trying to do isn't working, and she's coming across as a total liar and fool. My husband told me he wanted to talk to her and tell her she couldn't go around lying about us. But I told him he didn't need to say a word to her because the things she's doing are backfiring. Instead of damaging our reputation, she's damaging herself. So we can just let her carry on. Update 2. It's been about 2 weeks since we found out Steffi would no longer be getting married. She had been bad-mouthing us to all her relatives, but it didn't work because most people didn't trust what she was saying and came to me to confirm the story, and I told them the truth. After a few days, practically everyone knew the truth. So it was pointless for her to try to make us look bad, and she stopped doing it. We thought that would be the end of it, but apparently not, because now she's moved in with her parents, as unfortunately, she and her fiancé have broken up, and she has nowhere else to go. Her fiancé was decent enough to offer to let her keep the apartment while he moved out, but she couldn't afford the rent on her own, so she chose to move back in with her parents instead. Andy and I found it really ironic that she had so much to say when her parents told her they wouldn't fund her wedding, and she pretended everything was fine, but now her life was falling apart, and the only people she could turn to were her parents. My in-laws were kind enough to take her in, even after all her unpleasant behavior, but now that she's living with them, you'd think she'd have the sense not to keep bad-mouthing Andy and me, at least in front of her parents, because they're Andy's parents too. But she's truly one of the dumbest people I've met, because even after my in-laws made it clear she couldn't talk badly about us or act like we were the bad guys, she kept doing it in front of them and constantly tried to turn them against us. So my in-laws decided to tell her she could either accept her mistakes and try to be a better person, or they wouldn't let her live with them any longer. Of course, this made her angry because now she started messaging Andy daily, reminding him that not only did I ruin her bachelorette trip and her wedding, but now I've also ruined her life because her fiancé left her, and her parents only keep supporting me as if this were my fault. Andy hasn't blocked her yet because she's family, but she's treading on thin ice and a few more messages against me, and I'm pretty sure Andy will show up at his parents' house and teach her a lesson in person. I'm pretty sure she's just doing this to vent her frustrations, but it's unacceptable. Update 3. So, we did it. I really couldn't take it anymore because she was going too far and saying the most horrible things about me while messaging Andy. Even though she expected to get away with it because she thought we wouldn't actively retaliate against her, she was wrong because we're not that nice. She had called me every name under the sun and referred to me as jealous and insecure, and even said I don't look better than I did in high school, which was an outright lie. She knows I'm very sensitive about my appearance and makes sure to mock at every chance she gets, and at this point, it's become very evident. I also don't understand why she thinks I'd be jealous of her because my life is much better than hers right now, and she literally has nothing I'd be jealous or insecure about. But anyway, these were the things she had been texting Andy in an attempt to make us angry, and she succeeded because this afternoon, we went to my in-laws' house to confront her because she needed to stop thinking she could say and do whatever she wanted and then simply get away with it every time. We had already spoken to Andy's parents, and they knew why we were there, so they didn't ask many questions and let us in. Steffi had been sitting in the living room and looked very surprised to see us, even had the audacity to ask her parents why we were there as if we shouldn't be there, as if she were the only person allowed to visit her parents. They didn't respond, and instead, I took over the conversation and told her she needed to learn to shut her mouth because I'd had enough of her nonsense and wasn't going to tolerate her talking about me anymore. So she needed to stop talking about me to anyone at all, and if she didn't, I'd make sure my side of the story went public too, and it wouldn't end well for her. She immediately started making a scene and accused me of blackmailing her and her family of ambushing her, when all she had to do was shut up and apologize for everything. She said she wouldn't and started packing her things and left within an hour because she now knew she wasn't welcome there and would live with a friend. I'm sure she'll be back in a couple of weeks because I don't think any friend will let her live with them rent-free, and considering how stingy she is, I highly doubt she'll contribute anything when she could go back to her parents and live there for free. But for now, we're all free of her. And I'd say I'm much better off now, and I think everyone would agree with me when I say that. Update 4. Well, it wasn't a couple of weeks, but after a month, she returned to her parents' house, looking for a place to stay. The story my in-laws told me is that she lived with a couple of friends during that time, but they both ended up kicking her out, which is surprising because I thought they'd be as narcissistic as her since they were friends who were also going on the trip. So I assumed they'd get along. But it turns out that's not how it works. The interesting part is that my in-laws, even though they had defended me all this time, always tried to maintain a neutral stance since, at the end of the day, she was their daughter. But this time, they took a different side and told her she was no longer welcome there. Steffi said some hurtful things to her own parents, which, out of respect for them, I won't repeat here. I think I owe them that much after everything. Finally, she had to leave and has been living in her business, in the back, on an air mattress. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but if anyone deserves it, it's Steffi. Update 5. I think this will be my last update, as all the drama is veering away from my original post. But I feel I owe this to everyone who has been reading my story for so long. The last thing I mentioned about Steffi is that she was sleeping in her business. Well, now she's lost that too. Her business had to close because it never really took off. I know it's not a good thing to feel happy about someone else's misfortunes. My parents raised me better than that. But after everything she did to me when we were younger, plus everything I've shared here, I have to admit it feels a little satisfying to see her bad actions catching up with her. She treated me like a loser all my life, but at least this loser has a job, a good salary, a husband, and a house to sleep in. I don't know if Steffi can say the same. Well, that's all.